Welcome to the Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York. Mouth off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to sit in with me again on this episode of the Helping Conversation. I want to share with you a statement from a 10-year-old, and we're going to turn this statement into our conversation today with this 10-year-old who is no longer 10 years old, but to give you an idea of where even a 10-year-old can take their vision. As a 10-year-old, I had the opportunity to visit Kenya on safari, but when I arrived, I was shocked by the lack of available medical care and the normalcy of poverty that was all too familiar for these people. Privately, our tour guide would explain the shortfalls of the Kenyan government and express the importance of a good education. He showed me that my citizenship gives me a unique opportunity to have an effect on my own government and positively affect those outside of our borders. I believe that this influence and power to affect change lies within us, and we have the freedom and ability to decide how we will use it. Now, some of you might hear that came from a 10-year-old and think, oh, how cute, because 10-year-olds think really big, and they're not thinking about some of the logistical realities of changing the world. So let's fast forward a few years from when that statement was said, and let me introduce my guest today and ask you to join me in welcoming into the room Daphne Pariser. How are you doing, Daphne?
Hi, it's good to be on the show. I'm very excited about this.
Me too. I'm looking so forward to this conversation. This is such important work that you do and the conversation to be had today. So let me quickly share with everybody a little bit of who you are. So starting with this vision at only 10 years old, Daphne Pariser has worked on creating a model to end poverty through culturally sensitive, sustainable small businesses for people living in extreme poverty. Daphne is the founder and CEO of Humans for Education, and since 2016, she and her organization have impacted thousands of people. The mission statement for Humans for Education states that Humans for Education strategically delivers innovative solutions and quality education to combat the global educational deficit. Our programs help schools become economically self-sufficient and focus on developing curriculum and life skills to improve people's quality of life. Daphne received her Ph.D. from the University of Rochester, and in addition to being a full-time CEO, she is also a postdoctoral research fellow at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Brigham Hospital. She uses her science skills to build data collection into her not-for-profit organization to ensure that they are not just doing good, but proving that it has an effect on the community. And again, Daphne, thank you so much for sitting in with us today.
I'm really excited. This will be super fun.
Great. Thank you. So fill us in how a 10-year-old goes on safari, I believe with your father, sees what she sees, makes a statement that we could hear from many 10-year-olds, but has actually turned it into a very effective global not-for-profit organization.
It's a good question. So when I was 10, I guess I had never really seen poverty on that scale. And so when I saw it, it was this, I don't even know if I can totally explain it properly because it was so jarring that it really left an impact on me. And I never stopped thinking about it. So even when I came home, I think literally the day I got home, my mom and I started a collection jar and we started putting in like pennies and quarters and things like that. And very quickly I realized that wasn't doing any good. And then I started studying and I started working on science and I started understanding more about public health and started realizing what the real problems were and how big the problems were. And I decided that instead of doing spring break during my sophomore year or junior year of college, I decided to finance my way back to Kenya and just see what the people in Kenya had to say. Because even reading all those textbooks and having, all of that conversation at university was totally different than talking to these people about it. And when I went back the second time, it was just like, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. This is where I think that I can find meaning and actually do something that is impactful right here and right now. And it was really with the community's help that I was able to come up with these solutions. It was us who did it together. So I think that maybe answers your question.
Yeah. No, look, turning something from I see it with my own eyes, and this would be true whether you were 10 or you were 45. I see it with my own eyes, and I really want to do something. Turning that statement and that sentiment into action, true, significant, changing behavior action is a whole nother conversation. And so, the fact that you made this happen is absolutely just astounding to me, and says something immediately about who you are. So I read the mission statement for your organization, but maybe, tease out those words a little bit. At the end of the day, what does your organization do in its work over in Kenya?
Yeah, basically what we do is we've for the last 5 years or 4 years, we've been mostly focused on working with schools and helping them build small businesses. But now, because of COVID, we realize that it's really important to make sure that the parents who have students at these schools also have small businesses so that they can help their students to be, or to help the family be more financially stable so that the students can go to school and have the funds to actually do that. So now we're working both with schools and with families. This year, we're going to open or work with 2 new schools, hopefully, and about 450 families. So we're really excited about that. And basically the whole point of what we do is we help people, have some sort of financial stability, become a little bit more sustainable and rise out of poverty, because every single person that we work with makes less than $5 a day. And the majority of people that we work with make about 50 cents to $1 a day. So about 80 to 90% of the people we work with live in the most extreme poverty that you find in the world. Right.
So I know it took, and this is probably just me, when you and I first spoke, it took me a while to wrap my head around what you were doing, even when you describe it as you just described it. So let's start with the schools. So your organization comes in and give us in as basic terms as possible exactly what your organization does to help schools be more financially sustainable.
So one of the big things that we do is we really want to be culturally sensitive, because obviously, I've got plenty of board members who have, really great credentials in certain areas like tech or whatever, restaurants, but that might not work in this area of Kenya, right? So we need to make sure that the businesses that we're building are sustainable. So we do a lot of assessing. It takes us about 2 months to assess these schools, 2 to 4 months. And it's because we're extremely thorough. So we go through pretty much everything that you could think of. We talk to the teachers, the students, the neighbors, the family, the chief in the area, the board, the community elders. We talk to everybody that we can to get a really good understanding of what's going on, what resources does the school have, and what skills do they have. And then we go through all of their data. And it's a very exhausting and extensive process, but it helps us better understand how they handle their finances, how they handle their schools. And so with all that information, we create together with the schools, with the community elders, and with the chief, a specific business that is going to work for them. And we do this based on the resources that they have and the skills that they have. And the same thing applies to families as well. We use the exact same model for them too.
Right. So I want to highlight a couple of things you're saying that, again, in doing this podcast, I always want to translate things back to my language, both in the coaching world, in the larger coaching world. So I hear you, one, being incredibly ethnically and culturally sensitive, that we're not just walking in and saying, I know the answer. And you treat people there as their own best resource. They are their best resource. Exactly. Given their knowledge and their experience and the fact that it's their place, and that any business plan is co-created.
Exactly.
With feedback from everybody.
Yeah. And so I think that those two last points are like the key points. The biggest thing for us is really touching on their own resources, their own skills, and really, bringing out the best of these people, because we really believe that they don't really need a lot from us. Like, Sure, we do offer some educational courses. Everybody needs a business class every now and then, but what they need is a little bit of a financial step forward to help them be able to join the global market, join the global conversation. But they have the ability to do these things on their own, and really making sure that we find that and that we bring that to light is a lot of what we do.
Could you give our listeners a concrete example of a specific project, either with a school or with families, and helping them create their own business enterprises?
Yeah. So 2 examples. The first example, they're actually related, is we work with a school. One of our first schools was Destiny Shaper Primary School in Engoswani, Kenya. And when we first started working with them, there were a lot of different things that they needed help with. And so we helped them build a small business where they were able to buy and sell livestock, basically. And so what we found was that within 6 months, they started making income. And within a year, they were able to make 50% of their income was coming from the small businesses, wow, which we were very excited about.
Yeah.
So we obviously, as a scientist, we collect a lot of data. It doesn't stop at the assessments. We continue to collect it every single day, every week, every month. And so what we realized from this data collection was that when we built the small businesses, so we don't just build small businesses, by the way, we also put in WASH programs, because what we noticed was that schools were actually spending so much money sending kids to hospital. So in this area of Kenya, they don't expect the parents necessarily to pay if the kids are at the school. So the schools will pay for the kids to go to the hospital. Not only that, but the families were spending so much money on the hospital bills. And they were from really simple diseases that were easy to get rid of if you had clean water and soap when you washed your hands. So we implemented that right away. And basically, we required that the school take over that aspect of what we do once they started making money. So one of the things that we saw was there was a 40% decrease in malaria, typhoid, dysentery, and one other disease that is also related to infections in water. So anyway, we were really excited about that. And what we found was that it significantly reduced their hospitalization bills, both for the families and for the schools. So basically, they were not only able to start bringing in a lot more money, but they were also able to stop spending so much money. And so from all of this, what happened was they were able to put in electricity in their school. They got internet. They were able to buy more educational tools. They started hiring more staff. They actually put in a playground, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I said they built another classroom as well. And so that was really exciting. And one of the biggest pieces was the school has continued the business, and they actually were able to survive COVID specifically because they had their business, and they opened their doors back up in January. So we were really excited about that.
Yeah, right. So under normal circumstances, like many other parts of the world, they would have just closed down, and they were able not to.
There were a lot of schools that closed down this time. Mm-hmm.
So your organization, in a case like that, it will provide, if I'm understanding this correctly, it will provide financial support for these programs, and some level of technical support as well, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So one of the other things that we do is we actually have educational and mentorship classes. So we take the schools through a very intensive program so that they learn digital literacy, they learn how to use a laptop. We also are going to be starting a program where we're teaching them to do pitches and find other investors and and be able to write grants and things like that.
Right.
And so these educational classes are offered by us every single month.
That is amazing. So you said you also had an example from the world of helping a family create a business.
Right. So we're actually starting the family businesses this year. So we haven't officially started any yet, but one of the things that we noticed from our school was that because the schools had these small businesses, the small business itself was impacting the families. And what was so exciting about it was because the school was making more money, they were requesting less money from the parents. And so the parents were able to save their own money. They were able to send more kids to school. Some of them even started their own businesses because they were able to save so much money. And so what we realized was if we could specifically additionally help these families, we could really ensure that an entire community can rise out of poverty together, because now we have the educational piece where children are getting an education and able to rise out of poverty, but also the family now has enough money to send all of their kids to school and make sure that these kids are getting 3 meals a day. And when there are hospital visits, that they have the ability to pay for it. So maybe I'll be on the podcast next year and I'll tell you all about the 450 families.
Not maybe. You will be.
Okay, great.
Although we're not done with today's conversation, there's going to be a part 2 to this. I have no question. Question. So I was watching a video. I'm not exactly sure how many years ago it was that you did a TED Talk. It looks like it was a few years ago.
Yeah, 2018, I think.
2018. And you talked about these 3 areas that have the greatest impact on reducing poverty: health, education, and finances. Talk a little bit about those 3 areas and the interplay of the 3 of them in the reduction of poverty.
So when I first started the nonprofit, after going to Kenya and talking to the whole community, I had a lot of understanding of what the real problems were. And having studied some of this before, I knew there were a lot of nonprofits in this area. A lot of nonprofits work in education, in health, or in finance. And so I went back saying, what's the problem? Why are there still people who are having these issues? And one of the things that I was realizing through the conversation with the community was that a lot of these nonprofits specialize. And they specialize in education, they specialize in healthcare, they specialize in finance, which is fine and super helpful in some capacity. But what we realized was that these families, these schools really need a comprehensive plan to deal with everything. Because the biggest problem when you don't have money is that you can't deal with sick people. You can't feed enough of the family, and you can't send kids to get educated. And what we know is that when children get educated, they're more likely to join the job market. And every year that they're educated, they raise their potential income by 8%. So parents in these areas knew that. They wanted to send their kids to school. They wanted to have their own small businesses. They wanted to have access to a clinic, but there were no resources for them. And so through a lot of our own research and through talking with the community, what we realized was it was super important to have a model that comprehensively did all 3 of these things.
Right. Okay. And one of the other points you had made in the TED Talk that I just thought was fascinating was simply the impact of deworming.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So could you share a little bit, because it was such a powerful point of something that I sure wouldn't think about, is relatively simple, and yet sounds like if it's not treated, has such a negative impact on all of these folks.
So one of the reasons that we decided to do what we call WASH program, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene, is because of exactly this example. So the example is deworming, and a lot of people who focus on poverty focus on deworming, and the reason is a lot of people who live in poverty suffer from this condition because they're drinking unclean water. And there's a lot of reasons why this happens, but we might not need to go into that. So they end up getting infected, and because of these infections, they can actually be lethal some of the times. And it's a really serious disease that can be cured for basically 50 cents. And so a lot of people who do poverty work, instead of educating, instead of giving finance, will literally just go in and help communities basically get this medication and ensure that they don't have to have these health problems.
Right.
But the biggest issue that I was saying before is a lot of these families live on 50 cents a day. So they can't afford the medication by themselves. And so that was part of why when we put the WASH program together with the model that we have now, it's really impactful because not only do they have the ability to be sick less often, but now they have the finances to go help themselves when they do get sick.
Right. All right, so now we have an idea of what Humans for Education does, and the leadership and the education that it brings to this, and this comprehensiveness, as you're talking about, that it brings to this large global issue. So you said somewhere while in college you went back to Kenya. And followed up on this experience you had when you were 10, but followed up at a time when you were really ready to figure out what do I do? That's quite all right. Don't worry about those noises. We're an organic program, Daphne, and anything and everything that comes through, it's just all part of the experience.
All right. Well, sorry to all the listeners.
So I'm thinking that you show up there and attempt to engage Kenyans in this conversation. And for me, I immediately think, man, what a challenge to walk in and develop the level of trust, safety, and inclusiveness required to engage the Native people in this conversation, because who are you? And so fill us in a little bit on how that went and what were some of the thinking you had or perspective you had in that moment to really make sure that trust, safety, and inclusive conversation took place and was created.
So it's a super good point because you're so right. Like, I'm just some random American showing up in these people's backyards saying, hey, what's going on? Tell me about your problems. Like, why would they want to tell me about their problems? So one of the things that I did before I went there was I actually was able to establish a connection with one of the fathers of the schools that we went to. And he basically, I started this conversation with him, and I think it was almost a year before I actually came out that him and I had developed a good enough relationship where he felt comfortable bringing me out. And also I felt comfortable, wanting to go out and meet all these people and have these conversations. And so basically a lot of it was through him. And he had garnered so much trust in this community because his kids had gone to this school basically for their whole life. And he basically was able to create this conversation in the community about, we have to step up. We have to do something to help ourselves out of this situation. And there's potentially a person who might be able to give some resources to help us do that. And so what I learned by that was that I never wanted us to come in unannounced and unknown. And I never wanted Americans to show up, or even anybody outside of these villages to show up and say, what's going on, tell us, and let's fix it. That was never the idea. So one of the things that we do now is we always hire somebody from within the community to be our community lead. And they work with us directly. So we take about 6 to 8 months to train them. And then they go into the community and then they work directly with the community. And so they basically liaison between us. And I go out almost every 6 months except for COVID. Right. But even when I'm there, what I'm really looking at is, are the projects going on okay? What are the issues that we need to solve and things like that? But I really try to keep the communication between the people in the community because they know each other best. Right. And that's where the trust is. Right. You don't need some white person showing up and telling them what to do.
Right. So you're going to go out, you're going to find a person from the community.
Right.
Hire that person, train them to be your liaison.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so your experience in general with that model sounds like it's been pretty impactful.
Yeah, so we have a team who basically is from Kenya, and they'll go out and they will monitor the community and basically will talk with the community chiefs and say, we're looking to fill this position. And the community chief will come up with some names and things like that. We'll have our people interview them from, in Kenya. And that's sort of how it will work. So it is a very organic way that we try to do it. And we try to keep it, as much as we can in the Kenyan community, because it is really important to do that trust. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned is that this year we're only funding women-owned businesses. So we're not allowing any men to apply. And to do that is we really have to have trust in the community. And we were able to get the chief to sign off, and his wife is going to come campaign with us. And we're just really excited about it. And so we're in the process of assessing these families right now. And every day we keep getting more women who just show up at our door saying, can we be part of this and stuff like that. So it's really exciting. That
is very exciting. And you just beat me to it, because I was just about to ask, as you were talking about gaining the trust of the chiefs, are we talking, and I'm going to show my lack of knowledge here, my lack of cultural knowledge, are we talking about communities that are historically patriarchal in nature?
Yes. Yeah. So we typically work with the Maasai community, and the Maasai community is typically pretty patriarchal, where the Maasai men are allowed to marry as many women as they would like. And typically it's the burden of the men to go out and provide everything for the family, and the women stay home and do chores and things like that. And that is changing a lot. Kenya is changing generally in terms of being much more female positive and things like that. But we really want to incentivize that in communities. And one of the biggest reasons is not necessarily anything negative about men or anything like that, but there's a ton of data that shows when women own their own businesses, so much of this money comes back directly to the family, that families eat more food, that more kids go to school, all these things. And so it's really just, there's so much data that shows that this is a really good, business model, and teaching women to do this is really, really important. And so that's part of why we're pushing for that.
So as you've had these conversations, especially leading up to what you just shared of what the goal is for the next year around women-owned businesses, has this data been impactful with the traditionally male leadership within the communities you're working with?
So I thought we were going to have a lot more conversations than we did, to be honest. And basically, so our staff in Kenya, his name is Saruni Musa Latolu, and he walked into the chief's office one day and said, hey, this is what we want to do. Here's what the funds that we have behind us. This is what we're thinking. What do you think about it? And the chief sat down right then and there and wrote a letter to us saying, I support you 100%. I'm behind you. My wife is ready and willing whenever you I was just like, okay, great. It's not always that simple, but we were really, really excited that he was so behind us this time.
Right. So again, maybe an example of some of the ideas that are being generated in the name of women-owned businesses.
Yeah. So right now we're doing these assessments, and part of the assessment is looking at the market that already exists and then looking at the skills that the women have and thinking about what doesn't exist in your market that people want and need. Yeah. And what are the skills that you have that you can actually, do these things. And it's been really interesting because we have women from all walks of life. Some of these women are like car mechanics, which I wasn't expecting and was so excited about. And so they're telling me, there are no places to get cars fixed here. And there are a lot of people who need this, but I don't have the resources to do this. And so we start thinking about, okay, what are the things that we need to do to make this a successful business? And then there are other women who are fantastic at sewing, but their whole business relied on tourism. And now COVID is here and they have no tourism. Right. So we're thinking, okay, well, what are things that are not in the community that these people need? Sanitary pads are a huge thing that do not exist in this community. So that's another business idea that we've been thinking about. So basically we try not to limit it. We obviously don't have capacity to do everything, but we try to basically ask them, what sort of businesses would you be interested in? What are the skills that you have? And we have partnerships with several companies in Kenya that have a bunch of mentorship experience and have built a lot of these types of businesses that we're looking at. So they're going to be coming out and they're going to be mentoring some of these people directly. So what we'll do is we'll basically put them into groups in terms of what they're going to be working on and selling, and they'll get the mentorship and education directly for that, those sorts of things.
That's phenomenal. Yeah. Phenomenal. So you mentioned earlier that one of the linchpins of this comprehensive approach is health, good health, and that a part of that is making sure that vaccines and medicine are available to all of the folks that you work with. So as I was reading that, I just found myself so curious because we all know that right now in the good old United States, we're in the middle of this very interesting conversation with some segment of our population that does not trust the vaccinations that are out for COVID and is saying, I'm not going to get it. So it made me really curious about what your experience has been with the folks that you work in Kenya around, okay, so now this medicine and these vaccinations are more available to us. One of the byproducts of the work you're doing is we can afford it. Right. Is there an openness and acceptance and a level of comfort and trust with the use of these kinds of medications? Yeah, so it's a really good question. And, here in the U.S., I think that question is very complicated. And I, from the immunology background that I have, I do understand why there are pockets of people who are very concerned about the vaccine. Unfortunately, that's not the topic of what we're talking about today. Right. But I'd be happy to talk to you about that another time. All right, third time you come back, we're going to cover that one.
There we go. But in Kenya, it's a very different story. The history of vaccination in Kenya is very different than the history of vaccination in America. And so with Kenyans, if there is a vaccine available, it is everybody skips school that day. Everybody skips work that day. A lot of these women will walk, families in general will walk 15, 20 miles just to be able to get a vaccination. And it doesn't have to be COVID. These people are so, it is so important for them to get their children vaccinated that they are willing to do pretty much anything that they can to get their kids vaccinated. I had a mother that I was talking to. So while we're doing these assessments, I'm also listening into the assessments while Saruni is doing the assessments himself, and he translates into English for me. But one of the mothers that we were talking to walked 50 miles just to get to a clinic. And she had given birth, and she was looking for healthcare for her kids and things like that. And that's just the state of how some of these people live.
Right.
So for them, it's really, really important.
Right. So again, given that, if you can really take away the financial barriers or any other logistical barriers, then the families they're more than open to getting these services and these kinds of medications.
100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So to move for a moment away from what Humans for Education does to your role as CEO.
Sure.
All right. Because a part of a helping conversation is not only helping individuals and families, as you're eloquently talking about, but it's what you do in your role to grow and nurture an organization. So talk to us a little bit about some of those kinds of skills that you get to use every day, or ways of thinking that have played a role in creating and building your not-for-profit.
That's a good question. There's so many different aspects to what it takes. And I think when I first came into this, I was so data driven, as a scientist, that the very first presentation I ever gave was to a Rotary Club. And there were 2 people who fell asleep during my And then this guy came up to me at the end and he goes, "This is the worst presentation I've ever seen." And I was just like, because the whole thing was just data, because that's what I'm used to, as a scientist.
And I'm thinking data jazzes you.
It's super exciting to me. For me, I was like, this is an awesome presentation. So luckily this guy gave me his phone number and he said, "You know what, let me help you. Let me coach you through how this works."
Right.
And so luckily he, told me it has to be a little bit more personal. People want to hear stories, things like that. So I finally figured out, okay, science is not everybody's jazz. So I think one of the biggest things for me was not just having the ability to put finances together, do projections, do presentations. Like, that is all skills that you need. But I think the biggest thing for me was being able to listen. Because I think that it's not just like this work that we do has so little to do with me and so much to do with everybody around me, right? Like the community, if I can't listen to the community, there's no reason for me to be there. If I can't listen to our donors, none of them are going to be interested in what we do. And additionally, we are 99% volunteer base. And so really being able to hear what our volunteers need, want, and also what they can contribute in terms of their ideas and their concepts and things like that, I think was probably the most important thing that I have learned long term. Not to say that I was good at that in the beginning. It took a lot of time to learn, but I think it has been one of the most important pieces.
Right. You just said, not that it was the easiest thing to learn. I really believe, Daphne, that listening as a skill is a skill that most people don't realize how difficult it is to learn and to maintain and to quiet our own head. And you said this isn't about me, to quite honestly quiet our own ego and make this about something larger. That is not easy to do in the world of helping. Yeah.
And I think that's such a good point, because I think so much of the time ego does get in the way a lot. Right. And not only that, but I think sometimes, like, especially as a scientist, I always felt like, oh, well, I've looked at the data. I know what the data says. So clearly this must be the direction that we have to go. And that's not always the case. The data is really important, but the data can be interpreted different ways if you understand different pieces of it. And so being able to really hear the human aspect of it was so important. And being able to step back and kind of just be quiet and listen gave me, like, there were so many more ideas that were generated from all these people who have, this incredible capability to be creative.
Right.
But it took a long time to get there.
Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm going to share with you what I'm hearing. It sounds to me like that you have developed this ability to both celebrate your incredible excitement about data with understanding that there are other voices in the room that I need to wrap around the data to give the data some context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so important. Yeah.
So I'm going to assume that within your organization, you have also wrapped yourself with people who bring those different conversations and those different perspectives, so that when you are all in a room together, I'm going to use that word co-create again, that the sum is, the outcome is greater than the sum of its parts, so to speak, of everybody in the room.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, literally, like, I think it was maybe a month ago, I learned this game called Yes and. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I thought it was amazing because it kind of put together all these things that I thought that I was doing in this, like, super easy, fun game. And it's basically this idea, which I love, which comes with the concept that everybody who gives an idea, at least 10% of that idea can be good or useful or something.
Right.
And I really loved that. And so I made the whole team play this game, and we picked a theme. I can't remember exactly what the theme was. I think it was family businesses. And we just thought, we brainstormed. And the only rule was you had to say either what I like about that suggestion is, and expand on the idea, or yes and.
Yes.
It was so cool. I mean, it took the listening to this totally different level of, not only can we step back and can we listen, but now we can empower everybody else to feel free enough to say their ideas.
Yeah, beautiful. I was just in a conversation with a client of mine the other day, similar topic, and we were talking about, because this one person sometimes is wonderful, but they sometimes get feedback in their leadership that they can walk into a room a little bit too wedded to their idea. And we had this conversation about, what would it be like for this person to make a commitment to themselves that the next time they walk in a room with other people, that the only goal they have is to walk out of the room with full understanding of the other ideas in the room.
Ooh, I love that.
And to spend no time whatsoever even thinking about their idea. Just, this is my only goal.
Yeah.
And we had a good laugh about that, because the minute I said that, he looked at me and started laughing, knowingly that would be really hard for him. But it was a great conversation, because that's a little bit of this yes and. Can I go in and honor everybody else's opinion in the room, perspective in the room, without worrying about, like, somewhere I've got to get mine across?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think what that does is it allows the team to feel more free and more relaxed and more creative.
Yes.
And then it takes some of the burden off of you too. You don't have to be the only one coming up with good ideas, you know? So really giving them that ability to feel like they have some responsibility.
Right.
And letting them have that responsibility, I think, is so important.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm mindful of the time, because I know you have another place you need to get to. So we're a little short on time, which is another reason why we will be revisiting this with you, Daphne. But one of the questions I always ask all of my guests, because a foundational piece of the helping conversation, effective helping conversations, is to be strength-based, as we're talking about in how you have honored the people that you work with in Kenya as their own best resource, in what we were just talking about of how you build your organization and honor the wisdom that is in the room. So in the name of being strength-based, as the CEO of this organization, I'm going to give you a minute to brag about yourself. What are some of your unique strengths and talents and positive characteristics that you bring either to your work or you just bring to the world?
Ooh, that is interesting. Okay. I don't like talking about myself.
I know, most people don't.
Okay. I would say, apart from the data, which I think is really important, I think one of the biggest things that I bring to the table is I think allowing people to feel like they're being seen. And I think that the reason I say that, and the reason that I think that's different than the listening, is because you can listen, but that doesn't mean that people feel like you've heard them. And I think that one of the things that has been so important, especially working in these communities, is there is no possible way I will ever understand what it is like to live on 50 cents a day. Never.
Right.
Even if I tried, I wouldn't understand.
Right.
And I think to be able to put my ego aside and say, I won't ever get it. And I have to accept the fact that I will never understand. I think that has been really helpful in allowing me to have more helpful conversations with the people that I'm working with, because I am coming from a place where I know I don't get it.
Yeah.
That I am not, that they are the experts, and that they are teaching me.
Right.
And I think that allows them to feel like they have the power to change their situation. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think it could be easy to walk into a situation like that and try to, I don't know, like relate or something, or I get this, when no. I as you said that, I'm sitting here thinking there's no way I could ever come close to wrapping my head around what that must be like.
Even when I'm in Kenya, we stay at a hotel that's like $40 a night. And I mean, sometimes the electricity goes out, sometimes there's not hot water, but it's still a very nice place with a bed and walls and things like that. And the families we work with don't have those things. They don't have running water. They live in houses made of mud,
right.
And I will never understand how complicated and how difficult that is,
right.
To raise a family like that.
Right.
So I think that might be my biggest strength.
That's big. That's big. Right. If you're interested in more information on Daphne's organization, it is humansforeducation.org. And as always, if whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, please look in the show notes and I will have that URL there. Let me just highlight in terms of those maybe thinking about how they could financially support Daphne's organization. $10 supplies a feminine hygiene kit. You were just talking about this a few minutes ago, for one student for 3 years. $25 a month can support one student until graduation day. $200 buys one cow, which supplements annual school income. And $10,000 funds a brand new classroom. So I know the $10,000 is a big ask, but we're talking about $10 and smaller amounts and the impact that can have in helping the folks in Kenya that you are working with. Daphne Pariser, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing about Humans for Education. And thank you, and I mean this very sincerely. We kind of joked a little bit about this at first. Thank you for being a 10-year-old who figured out how to turn this into action in your adult world. I so honor what you and your organization and the work that you're doing.
I really appreciate that. I don't know if anyone's ever said it to me like that before, but I'm so grateful to be on this podcast and so grateful that I now know you. And I just thank you so much for allowing me to be here today.
Appreciate you making the time out of your busy schedule. I know that a lot is going on. I promise you that we will do a part 2.
Yes, I'm very excited.
Okay.
Can't wait to tell you what happens this year. It'll be so cool.
Yeah, we will. I'm going to follow up with you. No question. Thanks so much. You take care.
Okay, bye.
That was phenomenal. Phenomenal. And I hope everybody gives some thought to how to support an organization like this. You just heard Daphne getting very excited and enthusiastic, which is absolutely wonderful. I'm looking at her on Zoom and she's laughing. Think about supporting an organization like this or similar organizations out there that are actually doing the work. And let me highlight something, because you know how much this is music to my ears, that this is an evidence-based organization. There's not anything going on here. This is Daphne's strong point. This is the point where she put those people to sleep at that presentation. She loves data, and she gets data, and every decision that Humans for Education makes is data-driven, and that's saying something. So check it out. I hope you're able to make some time to join us for our next episode as we continue to shine a light on the skill and immense talent of people like Daphne Pariser, who are individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the Helping Conversation. Everybody have a great day.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the Helping Conversation.